And this was kind of a tricky, these guys were floating these signs out front of Stratford. And it was kind of a difficult shooting situation. And if I had the series of photos, we could go into it more. But I had this, you know, the way it was set up is like everybody was kind of backlit. They were all in the shade of the Chase building. It's late afternoon and the sun's coming in this way. Here it's bouncing off a building, which has probably helped lighting the sign. The sun bounces, goes this way. You know, like light coming through the paper. But for me, it's an example of finding a situation and you know, where the lighting is less than ideal, but making it work.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about that? I mean, if the lighting is less than ideal, is there ever a time that you use a flash?
Yes, we'll get to that.
Situation?
We'll get to that. Yeah, yeah, I wanted to talk about flash. So a lot of the stuff I've been taking, I mean, I hang out with these people a lot, and I like to try, at least when I'm shooting, be, you know, just blend in to the scene and not make myself obvious. Flash, of course, has a tendency to make yourself obvious, and it can be distracting to the situation and so forth. So for this project, I have used flash very little, and we'll get to, I'll show you when I decided. Yeah, you know, I could have used some flash to fill in these guys' faces. You know, a little light there so you could see them better. But I opted not to do that because, like I said, a lot of this project I'm not using flash for the reason I just gave, but also for aesthetics too. But to me, I kind of liked just letting them be dark and be figures in the scene. We don't necessarily have to see. To me, it's this silly sign that was really part of it, the balloons. The guys, to me, it wasn't as necessary of an element to worth getting my flash. And if I had used my flash, it would have filled in this sign too, and it wouldn't have had that lighting from behind. That to me makes it a little more interesting, or it would have covered up some of that lighting. Makes sense. So here's an example again of foreground, middle ground, background. Your eye tends to go to the letters first. It's also an example of how lines and shapes can lead your eye back into the back of the photo. It's almost as if you can't, I mean, unless you force yourself, you can't help but look backwards. Nice little red shirt helps, a little pop in color. And, you know, it's nice to have some action in the photo. Again, there's a little moment of him writing. You know, same up here. The repeating patterns you can see in the stepstones. I think the visual lines work a little stronger than the patterns, but it's there to add texture, another element. I guess we didn't list that up there, but it's another element of interesting photos is texture. But for me, the big thing here is the spacing of elements back into the photo. We're using those lines to move your eye back into the photo. And then this is an example of using the lines but in a different way. So the other photo we see was, you know, there's those diagonal lines. My camera is a little askew. It's, you know, the horizon's not lined up the way some people like to do. And it creates a little more energy into the photo, those strong lines, vertical or askew lines. This I purposely framed up so that everything was straight, and it gives it a more quiet feel, if that makes sense, to me anyway. It doesn't have strong lines going all over the place, or, you know, back into the frame. And yet the lines, of course, do are an important part of the image. And this was just a situation that they were going around downtown chalking, and I just stuck around, went off somewhere else, and I wanted to get, I already saw this in my head, you know, when they were writing the foreclosure. I was like, oh man, that would look so good, you know, framed up this way. And if you even notice, like, these lines have a tendency to bring your eye back into here. These lines this way. So it's just finding and using that. But, so when I was seeing that, people were still writing with chalk, and I thought, well, that's okay, but for a foreclosed, you know, foreclosed property, we think of as vacant, empty, quiet. So I waited till everybody left to get this, to get that feeling of a foreclosed bank, if only. So to me, those are two different ways to use lines in the photo. And, you know, here again, it's like my camera's a little askew versus this. They're both, you know, using lines, but in different ways. To me, this is a lot louder. This is quieter, if that makes sense visually. Again, these are lines that I see anyway, and lighting. A number of elements. I don't know how well it reads here, but there's a guy in the shadows, and he's looking off at the cops down there. And I really liked the feel of the lighting and the way, you know, it's not just his gaze, but I think these lines here help, but, and the shadow. Kind of moves your eye across the frame this way. If you notice, like, your eye doesn't go this way, it tends to go this way. And again, it's about the shapes and the lighting. For color, I've got some blue and yellow. I mean, that was just accidental. Blue and yellow complementary colors. You know, I didn't give them a blue sleeping bag. It just happened to be that way. Just the kind of things you sometimes find. And again, you know, interesting lighting. I meter off of the bright spots, and you know, I would just keep my meter settings locked down, and just because I know that light's not going to change, at least not when it's dark. So, and that's how I can keep the detail here, and I just let the shadows go. It's sort of style of doing things.
Could you
Yeah.
go over that just a little bit more? Like, what,
Yeah.
like, how long did you go with the exposure, and how wide was this lens? And
Okay. Yeah.
all the technical things here?
Yeah, sure. It's a wide-angle lens. A lot of this stuff, I had a different lens at the time than what I'm using now, and it goes all the way to a 17 millimeter. If anybody's familiar, that's wide enough to create distortion at the edges of the frame. It like bends the image. I try to avoid that, and sometimes I go there. I don't think this is quite that wide. It's probably about 24 millimeter maybe is what I had my zoom at. I'm just guessing. The exposure is really, we're in very low light here. So I have a high ISO setting. It's I'm going to guess 6400. That's usually what I was using for night. I was probably shooting wide open. My aperture was as wide as it could go, which is 2.8 for my lenses. So the aperture was as wide open. It could take in as much light as it could. I was probably shooting, I'm guessing, at a 30th of a second, maybe a 20th, which is right on the edge of, you know, where you can get blur and stuff. But that's, you know, I couldn't go much further without getting the photos too dark. There's a new, Nikon has a new camera out now that's even better in low light that only one day I'll get.
What would your ISO be?
6400 is what I would use at night.
So what camera is that you're?
It's a Nikon D3. And I think it's worth mentioning, like I never worked at a camera shop, and so I don't know all the different models of camera, this, that, and you know, Canon's model versus Nikon's model, and so on. So if people have questions about that, I'm not very I don't think I'd be very helpful with that.
But it is a full frame camera?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you mean full frame? Like I didn't.
When you say 24 millimeter lens, that's a true 24 millimeter.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, so I'm using a zoom, and this one goes down to 24, but it's a different lens than I had at the time. I'm guessing I was probably about 24. It was a zoom. Maybe I'm at 23 or something. I'm just guessing because I don't have too much distortion. There's a little kind of like bending it, patty wagon a little bit. So there's a little distortion, but not a lot. So yeah, it's a wide lens, high ISO setting, about as low a shutter speed as I could possibly go without blurring things. And some of that is a matter of holding your camera, without holding it steady. There's a trick that some people, take a deep breath.
What do you do? How do you do?
I just try and be careful, and it doesn't always work.
So to keep from getting a bunch of noise in the shadows, what do you?
Noise, like digital noise?
Yeah.
Well, for my camera, it does pretty good. It's a Nikon D3. It's a professional model. It does really pretty good at 6400. With a proper exposure, there's no real digital noise to it. There's grain, and you can't really tell. So this held true for film. It's also true for digital. The higher the ISO, the grainier the little individual dots, the grainier, the bigger the dots get. Kind of a rougher look. And conversely, the lower ISO, the little dots that make up the photo are even smaller. So it has a real fine look to it. With this projection, we can't really tell. I may have a couple other shots where you could see the graininess a little bit more. But that's one of the things you get when it's a trade-off. When you go up to a higher ISO, it's a grainier photo, which is part of the physics of it. I kind of like that look sometimes. I mean, particularly at night. And with the Occupy stuff, it gives that gritty feel that fits. If I were was doing something else, it might not work. But I don't mind the grainy look. Anything else about this image? Yeah.
When you're framing a skew like this one and the one with the chalk, are you framing with the viewfinder?
Yeah, everything for me is a viewfinder. This camera doesn't even have a little LED thing. So yeah, I'm always framing through the camera. And looking at the edges. There are some times when I have cropped photos for various reasons, but I try to always frame it in camera. And yeah, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Question? Yeah.
If someone could only afford one lens, what range would you recommend?
The one I have right here is really nice, and of course, like different brands, like Nikon and Canon have different lengths of lenses and stuff. There's all kinds of lenses out there, but this works best for me. It's a 24 to 70. I mean, if I had to choose one lens, the 24 is about as wide as you want to go without bending the edges. Starting to get that fisheye look, where the edges of the frame bend out. Unless you want that, you want to avoid it. So 24 is about as wide as you go, and then a 70, is a pretty good length for average. If I had to pick one lens, it would be that. The other lens that I use, and these days I'm just down to 2 lenses, is an 80 to 200 telephoto. Another zoom lens, but it starts at 80. It's kind of old, beat up. I need a new one, but 80 to 200 is the focal length. So this is a telephoto. some of the earlier shots I showed that, you know, compress the crowds. That's the lens I used for that. And so that gives me a range from 24 millimeter up to 200, which on average is enough for me. Be great to have like a 300 or 600 millimeter, but I just don't. They're really expensive, and I just don't have any for it. For like people who shoot a lot of sports, you might see those like giant lenses you see in sports games. That's what they're using. Any other questions on this image? Here we go again. I got kind of lucky here, if I remember correctly, although he was pumping his fist a lot and I was doing my best to get it in there. But to me, again, we're talking about foreground, middle, back. It kind of leads your eye through the photo. And as with a lot of these crowd shots, I'll get back to this, I've got the camera held up. I will get some shots with it looking through the viewfinder to get sort of straight shots, safe shots, because doing it this way is not always the safest as far as making the best images. However, I really like that perspective where you can see more of the crowd. If you just shoot it straight on, you don't see all these folks back there. You might not get as much of the capital. You'll not get that fist. And yeah, I think the fist thing, if I remember correctly, it was just a lucky thing. Although, like I said, I was paying attention. A lot of times when I'm holding my camera up this, or not a lot, I do pay attention to what I'm shooting. It's not just randomly firing it. I hold it in a way that I think is going to capture the frame the right way. And sometimes I have to crop those images. And sometimes they'll just be a little funny and there'll be too much sky or something. But when I'm doing that, I'm looking at what's going on and looking for, somebody yelling or a fist or something, to make the photo more interesting. So it's not just, click up here and, not pay attention. I'm really, looking at the scene to try and get a photo. Another great thing is the lighting in this. This is at dusk. And so the sun's kind of going down, and so the street lights are starting to kick on, but you still have ambient light. I really like that. One thing we haven't talked about is color temperature. I don't know how much we need to get into that, except that different light sources have different color temperatures. And without getting into too much physics, the sun we consider a normal light temperature. Other sources of light, like incandescent lights, like inside a house or street lights, make this yellow, warm color. And if you've taken pictures inside with a normal setting on your camera, you'll see that yellow, warm color. One of the great things about digital cameras now is there are settings for different light sources, at least for mine, but I think most have them now, for like sun, incandescent light, fluorescence, and so forth, to correct for the color of the image, of the color of the light source. These street lamps are so yellow that I can set my camera to tungsten. I also have a feature where I can change the color of the shot, and I can add as much blue, which is the opposite of yellow for color theory, and I still can't get all that yellow out, so I kind of just let it go. And I think it's sort of become an aesthetic. I've seen a lot of other Occupy photos, because stuff tends to happen at night, maybe more than with other protest movements, and that kind of yellow street light image or look is become, it's an aesthetic for me anyway for this stuff. But this is kind of it's a mixed lighting situation. God, these look so much better on the screen here than they do up there. Here's an example of framing and using a long lens. I'm using my telephoto lens. probably 150, 180, maybe even all the way up to 200, I'm not sure, but it's telephoto. This was a foreclosure auction at Travis County Courthouse that folks showed up to protest. It was kind of a tricky situation to shoot because these people, the people doing the bidding on the foreclosed properties were all huddled around this woman with her pen and her paper, and the protesters were sort of on the outside. And you know, I was wandering around different angles, and unfortunately getting a lot of backs. You know, people were all huddled together, and it'd be the backs of the protesters. We didn't even see these folks. So what I did was I got a long lens and positioned myself in between two people. This is a guy's back of a guy's head, and this is his shoulder, and there's someone over here, some body over there. And so I shot through them to bring the protesters and these folks together in the same frame. It compresses it, but I also liked the way that this framed it up. It just gave a, I don't know, there's a certain feeling to it, to me, like you're peering in on something that you know, got my attention at the time. A lot of this is just stuff that I just feel. I don't know how to explain that other than it's just a feeling. But to me, like framing it up that way, like I said, made it look like we were peering into this. It was a very strange little world, this auctioning. I don't know if other people think, but anyway. And again, long lens, so it compresses the shot. There's another one where we mentioned patterns. For me, the patterns here are people's eyes. There's something about the way my eye bounces around, and it's all about their eyes, and there's even a eye here. This was a night when the occupier was evicted, and everybody was wandering around in the streets in the rain. And they lost their home. And so that was it was kind of the feeling I got. Everybody's, well, that they felt like they were being chased by the cops. So everybody's sort of looking out. Again, I sometimes I really like framing out of focus subjects on the edges of the frame. It again creates a foreground background, although in a different sort of way than some of the others we were looking at. But if you notice, it's almost like two layers there, her and everybody else. But you know, capturing that eye and eyes, that's, if we didn't have that, I don't think that would have worked as well. And again, that's the street lighting. It's all kind of yellow and red. Questions?
I just have one
Yeah.
curious question. When you're photographing some of these images, do you get this feeling like you're part of them? Do you have that emotional thing where it's an us and them thing?
Yeah, that's, no. Emotionally, yeah, I mean, I want to say that I get caught up in the energy, but I do draw a line, at least in my head, intellectually. And like I said, in my actions I do that, whereas I don't participate. There's a couple occupiers here that know. Like I'll go to general assemblies a lot, but I never even sparkle or you know, consent to anything. It's a way, and sometimes I really wish I could. To be honest with you, I mean, there are lots of times it's like I'd love to go out there pumping my fist, but I like maintaining that line. I think it's important for maintaining the perspective and not getting caught up in the action where you can not notice certain things going on, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I've become good friends with a lot of these folks, and so there is that attachment. I mean, you're human, you know. And like I said, it's a movement I care about. I think that, you know, I'm the right things. So there is that, you know, that I can't say that I'm completely disengaged, you know. But I do draw a line in my head for, you know, what I'm doing. I'm there to document, not to participate, no matter how tempting that may be. And like I said, one of the ways through my actions, the way I keep that in my own head is I just don't cross that line to participate. Although I thought about it. I was like, God, I could do this, that, and the other thing, but I don't want to abandon my post because I think it has value and just leave it at that. This is another photo. It's backlit, but I really like the way it looks. And you can't quite see it's backlit, but there is some fill bounce to it. But I love the way your eye moves through the photo, or mine does anyway. And even though, I mean, these are people just standing in line, but there is sort of a repeating pattern there that, you know, you can think about composition as music too. I mean, you know, you compose music, there's a certain, you know, you just don't randomly throw the notes together. And to me, this almost has like a jazz feel, where it's just kind of bouncing around or something. But I love the details. The perspective is, I'm looking down, I'm standing up on the steps and looking down to kind of to spread out the space. And, you know, and again, we've got sort of the front and then leads on through to the back. And, I like the details and the shapes. Here's another kind of extreme example of foreground, background. These were some guys doing some guerrilla gardening and came across this little butterfly, which he just held up. And I'm like, yeah, let me get a picture of that. So real narrow depth of field. In fact, the butterfly's not even totally in focus. But, you know, this tends to pop out because it's sharper, and then the guy back here in the background. Almost 2 layers to the photo. It just helps make it more dynamic. You look in and then you look back. And just, you know, really, I mean, simple little thing. There's somebody holding a butterfly. It's not, you know, you're not being chased by the cops here or anything exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Someone from the city did show up, but anyway, and they did eventually tear it apart. Anyway, so yeah, that's an example of, you know, a close-up detail and then background. This was around the same time as that other photo with the fist. Again, it was awesome light. It was just like the perfect time of day. We still had a nice blue sky, but the street lights were starting to kick in. One of the things I really like about this, and you know, when I'm shooting, I mean, I'm seeing this stuff. I'm not necessarily planning, you know, there's street lines and I want to use those lines, but it's more something that I see. And, you know, you could almost compare this to Da Vinci's Last Supper, it's sort of an opposite image. But if you're familiar with that image, and this was something that, you know, Da Vinci and others discovered during the Renaissance, is how to create perspective with lines. And if you look at the Last Supper, he has the building with the windows that they're in. All the lines meet right in the middle where Jesus is sitting in the middle of the table. And so this is a similar approach. I'm not Da Vinci, but a similar approach in that these lines tend to draw your eye right up into here. Upside down sign, but right through this banner. You know, it tends to take you into the photo, and these bicycle wheels are, for me, a nice little touch too. But and so this is the kind of stuff like again, I'm not thinking, you know, oh, I want to use street lines to, you know, lead your eye through. It's more, you know, I'm just seeing that and responding to it. You see, oh, the way those lines work. And it's, you know, it's again, it's just sort of responding to, and of course knowing that these things exist. You know, we have street lines, we have building lines and stuff, so we can use them, and it's a matter of just seeing it.
The long shadows emphasize that line as well.
Yes, yeah, right. The shadows and the light, quality of the light. I mean, you know, any number of these photos, if you took one or two of the elements out, all of a sudden it wouldn't work as well. If you took these lines out, it wouldn't work as well. If this was just kind of average, you know, overcast day, it wouldn't work as well.
In the sky, because you go all the way to the back.
Right,
because of the sky.
right. And we have the nice sky. It's still enough, there's enough light out that we still see the sky is not black. So we kind of have mixed lighting there. It's one of the ways it makes the lighting neat. You know, if you have a march in the middle of a Saturday afternoon, it's overcast day, you can't change that. But if there's march at this time of day, I mean, take advantage of what you got. You know, there's other things to do with an overcast day, but it's, you know, it's a matter of taking advantage of what you have to work with. For me, another moment, again, this kind of gets back to the rule of thirds. He's not exactly in the third, it might be about over here, but she's off center a little. And it's just the way that, and for me, there's another moment there. There's a lot of emotion. And I just love the way that this is just coming out of the frame. Just, you can almost hear the volume. And the line of people back here sort of, you know, leads into that. We always include the chase sign that gives it context, so we're in front of a bank, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, we took that chase sign out, and, you know, it could be anywhere. So, you know, I'm shooting in front of a bank, I want to make it look like a bank, I'll include the sign. Here's another. This is a repeating pattern. Obviously, you've got 2/5 here, and it was just a lucky shot. I mean, I just caught. It's not like I was planning. You know, hey, put your 5th here and line it up with that. It's just what was going on here. He just got out of jail, and everybody was greeting him. They came back to City Hall. They were actually wanted to, and they did pose for a photo. Which happens quite a bit. We'll show other examples of that too. And for this kind of documentary work, I don't pose photos. You know, I'm documenting something, so I don't set up the photo. To me, that's interfering with what's happening. So they wanted, you know, a pose shot, and they're all looking at, you know, with their arms around and laughing and smiling. And I shot that, but I just kept shooting and shooting because I know eventually they'll get sick of the pose shot. They'll get sick of it. And then they'll be more candid. And I just keep shooting away until I get the nice candid moment. And he's still, of course, acknowledging my presence there, but they're at least not doing, you know, let's pose for the camera kind of thing. You know, which is fine, has its place, but it's not, for me, that's not really documenting the process. That's people acknowledging your presence in the pose to the camera. You can't see it. Someone asked about digital noise. There is some digital noise in this photo. It was shot at 6400, very low light. There's not really even there's not even really good street light. Kind of, but I had to lighten the photo up quite a bit, and there is noise. You're just not going to see it. If it were printed on glossy paper, you'd see it. And it's, for those who aren't familiar, well, maybe you've seen it. It's not just graininess, and this is a pretty grainy image, but you'll see these like lines, like grainy lines. That's the digital noise stuff. That somebody mentioned. I can see a little bit here.
Is that shot raw?
I'm sorry?
Is that raw?
Is that raw?
Are you shooting raw?
Oh, raw. No, I never shoot raw. It's just standard stuff. It's, you know, for journalists, you just don't really have the time to take with that kind of post-processing. And it's not necessarily needed for journalism work. The other thing for me, I don't know how many people are familiar with raw images, but when you process them the way people do, it looks unnatural. It looks like a painting to me. So people are able to get, I mean, it looks even more unnatural than old zone system photos. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but I don't know. To me, it's something unnatural. It's a different approach. It has its place. People like it. That's fine. It's not what I do.
So you're just storing JPEGs on
Yeah.
your card?
Yep.
Huh.
Yeah, these are all JPEGs. They're high resolution JPEGs, but yeah. So this is a detail shot. You know, details are another way of telling a story, rather than big wide shots of crowds. You know, a tight little detail. There's really nice light, like late in the day, and you know, so it's nice warm light coming through. I liked the circles. Again, this is sort of the repeating pattern stuff. This circle is a little off center. For me, it creates a little more interest. A real narrow depth of field. So that's the only really part. This candle's kind of in focus. I like the guys actually a little out of focus. You see, I'm not terribly picky sometimes with stuff. It's more like a feeling for me. But you know, this was set up. This is not something I arranged. It was just set up there, and what I arranged was the framing of the photo. I didn't move these candles around. So it was just a matter of finding that. And, I like the way the words kind of curve through that way. The flag's kind of glowing a little bit. And the color, I like the color a lot there. Working warm colors with that green plant. But again, for me, a detail shot. So it's an example of just coming up with some variety. This is perspective. I am either on the ground like this, or I have my camera on the ground. Or I may even be shooting without looking, just shooting my camera. I mean, I'm looking at the scene without looking through my camera. I'm probably at that low. But it just creates a more interesting image than, for me, than maybe shooting it just straight on standing. You know, this is an example of a different perspective. You shoot up real low. And then this is the same arch. I'm holding my camera up, shooting high or down. So it's the same event, very different pictures. And it's a different way of approaching it just from perspective. And, you know, got all the hands and the colors. So it's a lot of emotion and energy. Those are the things you look for, you know, to add to photos. Shooting activists is great for signs, you know, I love that because it's really easy to add meaning to a photo when you have sign. But, you know, I showed those two mainly as an example of perspective, high and low. Here's another low perspective because I love that tattoo, hope. And so, you know, I wanted to make sure and get that in there, so I got down real low. And again, there's sort of background information that kind of gives the setting. But, and again, framing up here, just his body. I like doing that sometimes with the edges because it takes away from the hard lines at the edges of the frame. It's for variety, and it makes things more intimate for me. Like you're really in there. But yeah, another perspective. It would be a very different photo if I had just stood there and, you know, and pointed down. And this is another example. And this is an example of me just, there's nothing really special for me anyway about this photo. Kind of just straight on, I'm just standing there. This would be the safe shot. So this safe shot, and it's also worth noticing he's about the right distance from the police, you really want, from the troopers. You don't want to get much closer. We'll get into that, but that's a good example of maybe it's about as close as you want to get, unless you want to get arrested. So that's kind of straight on. That's the safe shot, and then I start working. Working the scene. So, and he's on the ground, so that kind of helps too, but I'm getting down lower to get myself into the scene, and then even lower, I wanted to get the chalk. And he like spilled his chalk everywhere. It was really kind of funny. I don't know if you're familiar with the story. It's kind of a funny story. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I just really want to hear it. But anyway, you know, I wanted to include the chalk. I wanted to include the perspective of the chalk. That, and I love the way this guy was looking down. So I got really low. So, I mean, I probably had my camera, you know, I was probably shooting like this. But again, when I'm not looking through the camera frame, I'm looking at the scene myself. I'm looking at what's going on. And I've gotten very used to knowing how to angle my camera from doing that so much.
You'll never flip the viewer down. You're just looking at what you're doing. And
I'm looking at the scene, and I'm hoping I have my camera angled just right. And I've done it enough that I've learned how to angle it just right. But I'm definitely looking at the scene as to what's going on, so I know what I want to capture. But yeah, I loved all this chalk, and I was like, how can I get that chalk better in there? And well, let's just get down real low. And that guy's looking down. It's a funny situation. Here's an example of real narrow depth of field. Shot with a long lens. This is probably a 200, probably all the way for my lens. And I was probably shooting it at an aperture of, I don't know, f4 maybe. A pretty narrow aperture. We were talking about that before. So not narrow, pretty wide open aperture. And so that it creates a real narrow depth of field, narrow space that's in focus. And so really the only thing in focus is his sign and his face. And so it's a way, of course, making your subject matter stand out, pops out of the frame, rather than just a flat image that comes standing with a sign. I also waited until these cars moved around to get these lights. And it just so happened he kept that expression on his face. But, you know, it just added a little extra color. I just like, we're talking about repeating patterns in color. It added the red contrasts with the green, which at the time, that was something I was aware of, with this green rain jacket she was wearing. And I just thought, well, it'd be really neat if, it's a matter of just standing there and shooting and waiting for the cars to line up. And I'm just shooting, like, oh, there go the cars, and, you know, so it's, when you had asked about, you know, working a shot, a lot of times it's, I'm seeing it, what I want, and then I'm working it so that everything comes together for what I think works. Similar kind of situation. This was at a General Assembly meeting, real narrow depth of field. And so Ronnie's sharp, and she's in the background, and, you know, has this really intense look on her face. So I love the juxtaposition there. But again, you know, foreground, background to create depth in the photo. And Ronnie right over there is obviously intensely engaged, and so is she. And so it has, there's a feeling, there's a moment to it, to me, where he's got his hands and that look on her face, looking back. But, you know, again, real narrow depth of field. And in this case, this is sort of by default. This is at night. It's in front of the Capitol. I don't have a lot of light to work with. So I kind of have to shoot with a narrow depth, with an aperture wide open to get as much light as I can. So it's kind of a way of just using what you got, you know. I couldn't have made a photo with a lot of depth of field if I wanted for this, because it was just too dark.
Where was that light coming from? That wasn't, you didn't flash that?
No, this is, it's in front of the Capitol. They have big lights that light up the building, and sort of a driveway around there. Thank you. So, no, that's just taking advantage of the overhead lights. Which actually are pretty bright. It's still nighttime. Another example of a long lens to compress a crowd that everybody decided to walk in one single file line here on the sidewalks. Everybody's sort of spread out. So I'm ahead of the group and shooting with a long lens to compress them in, and wanted to make the sign be the focal point. Which I don't know, sometimes my eyes go more to the faces than the sign, but that's what I was trying to do anyway. And I actually did put it in the center there. It's kind of a different way of composing than a lot of my other stuff. But it's an example of using a long lens to compress a crowd to make it look like there's more people. This is an example. I'm using this for a couple reasons. One, to sort of show how I cover a march in particular. I jump out in front to get the march coming at me. I might use a wide angle, like in this case, or I might use a telephoto, like the last photo. And then the march moves through me, and I'm shooting as people are going past, and until I get to the end or near the end, and then I loop back around. And I keep trying to do that as much as I can. It involves hustling along the road, but that's one of the approaches I take for shooting this stuff. Is get out ahead, they move through, I go back out. I might get people walking by or whatever, but get back out in front again and we move through. And one of the advantages here of me being out front is this guy stuck his head out of the door, kind of like, what's the noise? And I really liked that moment. And again, we're talking foreground, background, leading you into the picture. And it was just a moment, I'm just standing there waiting for the crowd to come, and he pokes his head out. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Another example of different foreground background relationships. I go through this over and over, but that's a big part of making good photos. And what I wanted to capture in this scene, this was a day after everybody was evicted from City Hall. It's in front of the Travis County Courthouse. People are in jail. They're doing jail support, waiting for folks to get out. And he's talking with a local member of the media. She had been covering Occupy for a while, and myself and others felt like she had, I think she was with Fox, I can't remember. Anyway, she had a certain point of view she wanted to push. And whether it's fair or not, I caught this image of her looking. There's a bunch of folks making some noise across the courtyard, and while he's passionately explaining whatever it is that Duffy's explaining, she turns away, and is like, gives a feeling like she's ignoring him. I don't know, for right or wrong. Most of the time she wasn't ignoring him. So I don't know if it's fair or not. I felt it was fair. To me it represented, the media ignoring an activist. For me that's what that represented. And again, I wasn't meaning to do this. I was just shooting. I wanted to get a shot of him talking to the media because that was part of the story. And she turns her head real quickly, and she is ignoring him. She is looking off. But it was just one of these things I just caught. She turns her head into the frame of my photo, and I just caught it. And, you know, it felt it at the time, and then went back and was like, yeah, that really did kind of represent, to me anyway, sort of the way the media were treating occupiers. So there's a way of creating meaning in a photo. It's one of those things you have to make a call, like, you know, is that a fair thing to say about the media? I don't know. But to me, I made that call and said, yeah, I'll make it, you know, she's looking like she's ignoring me. It's a fair call for me. So we're getting into here about, you know, creating meaning, and Dan, I think you had asked about, you know, covering an event and paying attention to what's going on. So I think this was a march during South by Southwest, and somehow this banner came out to the chagrin of some folks. At any rate, so we're on 6th Street, it's weekend night, and so there's the 6th Street crowd. And a lot of the African American folks saw this banner and, you know, were drawn to it right away. Oh, wow, fuck the police. Be familiar, you know, with African American communities and the police, you can understand that. But they were drawn as like, oh my God, look at the white folks with the fuck the police sign. Oh my God, they're finally getting it, you know? And so there was a lot of, you know, this kind of interaction going on. There were a lot of, if there were people that were there that night, and they remembered, there were a lot of folks that wanted to pose with this banner. And I got pictures of people, you know, posing next to the banner, getting their pictures taken and stuff. And so I'm paying attention to this going on and recognizing this dynamic where some of the more African American folks, you know, are picking up on, wow, Whitey's got the message. And so, you know, and I'm struggling to capture, like, how do I get that across? And it just came up on this moment. And it was a kind of a lucky thing where he just put his head into my frame, into the frame of the photo, and this guy's just going, come on. And it was one of those things where I'm looking for, you know, what I want to cover. And I'm looking at and putting myself in position and then getting lucky. And you know, that's a good part of it right there, is you put yourself in the right position where you want to be or think you want to be, and then if you get lucky, all the better. Questions? This photo was taken after eviction at City Hall. There were there was kind of a real downer sort of feeling. Everybody had lost the encampment, and people were making kites for a kite festival the following weekend. He was out here flying that kite, and there was I had a sense of, you know, a feeling of optimism or hope or whatever with that kite flying. And I saw the way he was doing it, how it kind of lined up with the building. It almost pulled up the building. But I probably took at least 50 shots before I got to this. Because he's moving around, I'm moving around, but he's not really paying attention to me. Which is one of the advantages when you do this over and over and over, people get used to being around. And I just kept waiting until I could line it up just right, so that it almost looks like he's lifting up City Hall. It gives this feeling of, you know, for me it's kind of uplifting. But it really was a situation where I had to just keep working it, working the angles, and he's moving around, he doesn't know what I'm trying to do. And he's flying a kite. And there were a couple frames where I got him lined up just right, and then the kite was out of the frame, and, you know, because it just flew off, and things like that. So it's an example of how I have to keep working to put the elements together the way, you know, I think they should be. Again, foreground, middle, back, relationships there to create depth. Here's another example. This was after a chalking action where some folks got arrested. And I just happened to just see, again, this is just seeing stuff. So you just see this is a shadow from a Capital Metro bench over the words "we," and to me that it was a visual metaphor, and so it was, you know, it's one of these things that you could easily, if you're not paying attention, walk by and just read "We Are the 99%" because those are the words, without maybe seeing the shadow. It's an example of actually seeing what's in front of you, not just reading it, and then picking up the visual metaphor. It looks like they're like bar signs. This was another way of, you know, bringing in elements to create meaning, additional meaning in the photo. And an example of just seeing what is actually in front of you instead of.
It's probably more emphasized in the photo that shadow
Yes.
is more stark
Yes.
in real life.
Yeah, I probably made it a little bit more contrasty.
Yeah, I just didn't know if you did something or if it's just.
Yeah, and we can talk about that. We'll get really near. We'll three of them there. I forgot to ask Bob if we could run over. Anyway, yeah, in person, yeah, it wasn't as quite as stark as this, but it was still there, and I saw that. Wow, that's a nice visual metaphor. So this is a situation where there's a series of shots here, and what I'm showing again is how I work a scene to get what I think I want. And we should back up a little. You know, I can't say for sure if these folks were homeless. They were sleeping on the steps. They're probably part of the transient crowd, or I don't know, but I don't know their whole background, obviously. But through my job, I've had to do a lot of photography of homeless folks, and it's one of the tougher parts of my job. The only thing worse is shooting red carpets. For me, anyway.
Shooting what?
Red carpets, you know,
Okay, yeah.
celebrity stuff. It's just, gross. I'd rather be with people, celebrities. Anyway, you know, if you had experience photographing that part of the population, you know, sometimes they can get belligerent about it, or, you know, no, don't take my picture, or you know, yeah, you take my picture if you give me $5, kind of thing, which I don't do. And so these people were just hanging out on the steps and hamming it up for the camera. It was another situation where people wanted to pose. And well, I should back up and say, I hung out with them for, I don't know, at least 10 minutes not taking pictures. Just talking, just being a person, you know, not walking up, and this is one of the things to do with you know, in situations like this. You don't just walk up and start taking pictures. You know, go and say hello. Or sometimes I'll take pictures of something else. You know, and what are you taking pictures of? They'll ask me, or I sit down and talk and so forth. But eventually, they're, you know, like, hey, take some pictures of us. I'm like, okay, sure. You know, well, now they're asking me. You know, so I've turned it around from, you know, don't shoot me to, you know, now they're wanting it. So I'm playing around. I like I said before, I don't really like posed shots of people hamming things up, or at least not when documenting. And but I'm just shooting it because I want to see where it goes. So they just keep hamming it up. You know, you see them hamming it up here for the camera. And you know, she puts the hat on it. And this is, you know, I'm sitting here taking pictures for a while they're doing this. And if you notice, so here, I mean, here they're hamming it up for me. Then they start just playing, you know, playing around together. And then I caught what I felt was the moment that I wanted to catch. And it was just a candid moment here. And for me, that was more meaningful than, you know, this kind of stuff here. But it was a matter of having to just keep shooting, and yeah, sure, go ahead and pose. And then they get tired of that. They get bored, and then I can get a candid shot. And you know, and I'm in close. And so what I guess I'm trying to explain is I don't think that I could have just walked up with my camera, sat down, and gotten that picture. It took some time hanging out, just being a human being. Just because you have a camera doesn't mean gives you license to go around and stick cameras in people's faces. And particularly, obviously people who are living on the street are sensitive to that for obvious reasons. Throw this one in. Oh, we're going to get into cops now. A lot of cop photos. So one of the questions I get at, or it comes up, I see people ask this, is, are we allowed to take pictures of the police? People get told they can't and things. You are allowed to take pictures of the police. In fact, you're allowed to take pictures of anyone as long as you are in public. And the police can take pictures of you. They have a right. I'm actually filed, it was off the subject, but I filed a Freedom of Information Act request to try and figure out where are the, I've had this happen to me quite a bit, and I want to find out where those photos go. Let's see if I have any luck with that. But I'm curious. I just, with the, the NSA thing, I just felt more inspired to try and figure that one out. Like, where do these pictures end up? They've got so many of them of me, and others too.
And are they using their private phones or those?
And then this is his cell phone, yeah. And in fact, I had commander, EPD commander one time just walk up to me, take out his cell phone, take my picture, and walk off. So this guy I was kind of playing around with. We were taking pictures of each other and almost kind of dancing around. You can see he's laughing. Of course, they were sort of laughing anyway. So it's stereotypical cops. But yeah, we were kind of having fun with it. I was dancing around, trying to get different angles, and he's following me around. And we just thought it was funny. But anyway. So yeah, cops can take a picture of you. You can take pictures of the cops.